The last broadcast. Jason Carter was a late-night radio host in a small town in Pennsylvania. His show, The Midnight Hour, specialized in eerie stories, conspiracy theories, and unsettling phone calls from insomniacs and loners. But one night, he received a call that would change everything. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the station's phone line buzzed. Jason answered in his usual charismatic voice. "You're live on The Midnight Hour. What's keeping you up tonight?" A deep, distorted whisper came through the line. "You should leave. Now." Jason chuckled. "Now, why would I do that?" "Because it's coming, and it knows you're listening." Static filled the line, then silence. Jason checked the caller ID, an unlisted number. Prank calls weren't unusual, but something about this voice sent a chill through him. Shrugging it off, he continued the show. Minutes later, the station's emergency lights flickered, and a shadow moved outside the soundproof booth. Jason assumed it was his producer, Mark, but when he looked at the control room, it was empty. Then the phone rang again. This time, the voice was clearer but still warped, as if spoken through layers of static. "It's in the building." Jason's stomach nodded. "Who is this?" "Get out. Now." A low hum filled the studio, deep and resonant, vibrating in his chest. The equipment crackled and the air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. The soundboard's dials twisted on their own, voices whispering through the static. Then he heard it, a shuffle in the hallway. Slow, deliberate. Jason's breath hitched. He turned off the mic and grabbed his phone, ready to call Mark. But before he could dial, the emergency lights cut out completely, plunging the studio into darkness. A sound, like nails dragging across the walls, crept closer. Jason felt paralyzed, his body refusing to move. Then, in the dim glow of the emergency exit sign, he saw it. A figure stood at the booth's window. Its shape was vaguely human, but its proportions were wrong. Too tall, limbs too long. Its face was obscured, shifting like a blurred signal. Jason's mind screamed to run, but he was frozen in place. The figure raised one elongated hand and pointed directly at him. The glass between them cracked, a jagged spiderweb spreading outward. Then the phone rang again. Jason swallowed hard and answered with a shaking hand. The same voice whispered, "It's inside." The line went dead. Jason turned, and the last thing he saw was a flicker of movement behind him before the studio was swallowed by static. The next morning, Mark arrived to find the station empty. Jason was gone. The only thing left was the broadcast still looping on air, a constant whisper repeating, "It's inside." No one ever found Jason, and The Midnight Hour never aired again. But sometimes on silent frequencies late at night, people swear they can still hear his voice, warning them to leave before it's too late. Years passed, and the legend of Jason Carter became a ghost story shared among radio enthusiasts. Some claim to have intercepted lost broadcasts, fragmented words cutting through the silence. One stormy night, a college student named Liam, fascinated by the mystery, decided to investigate. Equipped with an old radio tuner, he locked himself in his dorm room, turning the dial slowly, searching for forgotten frequencies. At exactly 3:07 a.m., his radio crackled to life. A familiar voice came through, distorted but unmistakable. "Leave. Now." Liam's blood ran cold. "Jason?" he whispered. A deep, inhuman growl rumbled through the speakers, followed by the scraping of nails against metal. The room's lights flickered, and his laptop screen filled with static. The whisper returned, growing louder. "It knows you're listening." The door to his dorm creaked open, though he knew he had locked it. A shadow stretched across the floor, impossibly tall. The last thing Liam heard before his radio went silent was Jason's final warning. "Run. I've written a chilling horror story for you. Let me know if you'd like any tweaks or additions." The disappearance of Jason Carter became a local legend, but for Mark it was personal. He had worked with Jason for years, and the unanswered questions gnawed at him. 1 year after Jason vanished, Mark returned to the abandoned radio station. The building had been shut down, yet something kept drawing him back. Dust coated the equipment, and the air was thick with stale silence. Mark hesitated before switching on the power, half expecting to hear Jason's voice crackling through the speakers, but only static filled the airwaves. Then the phone rang. Mark's breath hitched. The landline should have been disconnected. He picked up the receiver, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hello?" A familiar voice, distant and distorted, responded. "Mark, it's inside." His blood turned to ice. "Jason?" he choked out. The line went dead. The emergency lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Then, a sound, a low hum, just like Jason had described before he vanished. It pulsed through the air, growing louder. Mark grabbed his phone and hit record as he cautiously moved toward the control room. The dials on the soundboard twitched, voices whispering in the static. A shape flickered in the reflection of the darkened monitor, tall, distorted, its limbs too long. A breath of cold air whispered against Mark's neck. He spun around, but nothing was there. Yet the static on the speakers grew frantic, whispers layering over one another. "Leave, before it sees you." Mark didn't need to be told twice. He bolted for the exit, but the door slammed shut on its own. The hum became a deafening roar, and the emergency lights burst, plunging the station into darkness. The last thing Mark saw before everything went black was the reflection in the cracked window. A figure, watching him from the other side. The next morning, police found the station in disarray, but there was no sign of Mark, just an eerie looping broadcast playing on the airwaves. "It's inside. It's inside. It's inside." Days passed, and the disappearance of Mark sent shockwaves through the town. Authorities combed the station, but all they found was the looping broadcast, "It's inside. It's inside. It's inside," playing endlessly on an inactive frequency. The townspeople whispered about the curse, about the voices, about the figures in the dark. Then one night Claire, Mark's younger sister, received a message from his number. "Help me. It's not too late." Her heart pounded as she stared at the screen. Rationality told her it was impossible. Mark's phone had been recovered, crushed and lifeless. Yet the message was there, time-stamped only minutes ago. She knew where she had to go. Armed with a flashlight and a portable radio, Claire made her way to the station. The building stood silent, almost expectant, as she forced the rusted door open. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of dust and something else. Something rotten. She turned on the radio and tuned it to the station's last known frequency. The static shifted, forming something between a whisper and a growl. "Claire, you shouldn't have come." Her breath hitched. "Mark, is that you? Leave, before it takes you too." A crash echoed from the hallway. Claire swung her flashlight toward the sound, catching a glimpse of movement. Too quick, too fluid. The emergency lights flickered, bathing the station in a sickly glow. A shadow slithered along the walls, unnatural in its movements. The whispers grew frantic, overlapping, twisting. Claire clenched her fists and stepped forward. "I'm not leaving without you." The whispering stopped. Silence stretched unnaturally long before the radio crackled again. "Behind you." A sharp, cold breath caressed her neck. Claire spun, and for the briefest moment she saw it. The same elongated figure Jason and Mark had seen before vanishing. It reached toward her, its face shifting like an unstable signal. Claire screamed and bolted for the door, but it slammed shut with a deafening bang. The hum returned, vibrating through her skull. She dropped to her knees, clutching the radio as the voices turned into an agonized wail. Then, suddenly, silence. The door creaked open by itself. Claire staggered to her feet, gasping for air, and ran without looking back. As she reached the safety of the street, she glanced at the radio in her shaking hands. The screen flashed a single message: "Run." The next morning, the station was empty again. but a new broadcast had started looping across the abandoned frequency. She got away, but it's still inside, and it's waiting. Some say Claire left town that very night. Others say she still listens, trying to decipher the whispers and the static, hoping to find a way to bring Mark back. But no one who's entered the station since has ever come out again. Weeks passed since Claire's terrifying escape, and the radio station remained abandoned, an untouched relic of the horrors that unfolded within. The town whispered about the cursed frequency, about the ones who disappeared, and about Claire, the only one who had returned. Determined to end the nightmare, Claire returned one last time, armed with a recorder and an old journal she found in Mark's apartment. It contained notes, desperate scribbles detailing frequencies, symbols, and theories about the entity lurking in the station. One entry stood out. "It exists in sound. It feeds on our voices. The only way to stop it is to disrupt the signal." Claire set up her recorder, tuning it to the same abandoned frequency. The static filled the room, but this time she was ready. "I know you're here," she said, voice steady despite the cold sweat on her back. "You've taken enough. It ends now." The static shifted. A deep hum resonated through the station, the walls vibrating with unseen energy. The lights flickered erratically. Then, the voice returned. "You can't stop me." Claire swallowed her fear and pressed a button on her recorder, playing back Mark's last transmission. His voice, raw, terrified, echoed through the speakers. "It's inside. It's inside. It's inside." The entity screeched, the sound reverberating through the airwaves, twisting into an agonized howl. The frequency meter on Claire's device spiked violently before the station's equipment sparked and short-circuited, plunging everything into a dead silence. Claire bolted out of the building, barely escaping before the entire station collapsed in on itself. The hum was gone. The static had vanished. The town moved on, and the legend of the midnight hour faded into obscurity. The abandoned frequency never broadcasted again. But sometimes, on quiet nights, if you scan the radio long enough, you might hear a faint whisper through the static. It's still listening, and it's waiting.